Good afternoon. This is Chapter 8, Economic Fluctuations, Unemployment, and Inflation. Swings in the Economic Pendulum. Instability in the growth of real GDP, 1960 to 2019. Although real GDP in the United States has grown at an average rate of about 3% a year, significantly lower than China's, by the way, the growth has been characterized by economic ups and downs. Note in this chart here, periods of recession are indicated with shading. So this would be the shading that we're talking about here. In the hypothetical business cycle, the four phases are expansion, peak, contraction, and recessionary trough. In contrast with the business cycle represented here, as the previous exhibit illustrated, real-world business cycles are characterized by expansions and contractions of varying duration and different types of magnitude. Economic fluctuations and the labor market. Labor market classifications. An employed person is a person 16 years or older who is working for pay at least 1 hour per week, self-employed, or working 15 hours more each week without pay in a family-operated enterprise. Unemployed, a person not currently employed who is actively seeking a job or waiting to begin a job or on layoff waiting to return to a previous job. The civilian labor force are civilians 16 and older who are either employed or unemployed. Not in the labor force, persons 16 years and older who are neither employed nor unemployed, like retirees, students, homemakers, or disabled persons. In additional labor market indicators, the non-institutional civilian adult population is grouped into two broad categories: persons not in the labor force and persons in the labor force. And that group includes both the employed and unemployed. So the labor force participation rate, which is an important economic indicator, is equal to the number of people in the labor force divided by the civilian population of people 16 plus years or older. So recall that the labor force equals employed plus unemployed. The U.S. population, employment, unemployment, February 2020. So non-institutional civilian population age 16 and older represents 259.6 million. Not in the labor force, 95 million. Total civilian labor force, 164.5 million. Employed, 158.8, and unemployed, 5.8. And these are the statistics. Labor force participation rate is 63.4%. Employment to population ratio, 61.2%. And rate of unemployment, 3.5%. The unemployment rate from 1960 to 2020 is illustrated here in this chart. As expected, unemployment rose rapidly during each of the 8 recessions. The shaded areas indicated periods of recession, here. As expected, unemployment rose rapidly during each of these 8 recessions. In contrast, after each recession ended, the unemployment rate began to decline soon after the economy moved into an expansionary phase of the business cycle. Note that the actual rate of unemployment was greater than the natural rate during and immediately following each recession. Labor force participation rate of men and women 1948 to 2019. The labor force participation rate of women has been steadily increasing for several decades. During the same period, the rate of men has been falling. Both the labor force participation rate and the employment population ratio trended upward from 1980 to 2000, but have been declining since. Both figures fell sharply during the 2008-2009 recession. Each has had a weak rebound during the recovery phase of this business cycle. In 2019, both were still below their 2007 levels. Composition of the unemployed by reason in 2020. There are various reasons why persons were unemployed in February of 2020. One-third of the unemployed were dismissed from their previous jobs or fired. Two-fifths, 39.7% of the unemployed, were either new entrants or re-entrants into the labor force. The unemployment rate by age and gender, February 2020. In 2020, the unemployment rate was 3.6% for men and 3.4% for women. The unemployment rates of younger men are higher than the rates of women, and the unemployment rate itself was also much higher for those under the age of 25 than for those over the age of 25. And these are the statistics that we can see when we analyze this chart. Can you see any other statistics as you review the chart and see what's going on? Questions for thought. Classify the following as employed, unemployed, or not in labor force. A, person who is not working but applied for a job at Target last week. B, person working part-time and searching diligently for a full-time job. C, auto worker vacationing in Florida during a layoff at a General Motors plant who expects to be recalled in a couple of weeks. D, 17-year-old who works 6 hours per week throwing newspapers. I think they mean delivering newspapers. E, homemaker working 70 hours a week preparing meals and performing other household services. College student who spends between 50 and 60 hours a week attending classes and studying. And G, a retired Social Security recipient. The following are for the U.S. in October 2020 in millions. Population, 331. Civilian population, age 16 and over, 260.9. Employed, 149.8. Unemployed, 11.1. Calculate the unemployment rate, calculate the labor force participation rate, and calculate the unemployment to population ratio. Now go do it. Three types of unemployment. Friction unemployment is caused by imperfect information and occurs because employers are not aware of all available workers and their qualifications, and available workers are not fully aware of all of the jobs being offered by employers. So frictional unemployment is one type. Structural unemployment reflects an imperfect match of employee skills to skills requirements of the available jobs. Also reflects structural and demographic characteristics of the labor market. Then we have cyclical unemployment, which reflects business cycle conditions. When there is a general downturn in business activity, cyclical unemployment increases. Entrepreneurs who have changed our lives. Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Job search is vitally important for the efficient operation of labor markets. In recent years, Google, a company founded by Sergey Brin and Larry Page, has dramatically improved the search process in numerous areas, including labor markets. Brin and Page met as graduate students at Stanford, both working on their PhD in computer science. As Page tells it, he had a slew of ideas for his PhD dissertation, but his advisor liked one especially, studying how information was linked on the World Wide Web. That led to the creation of Google, and Google is the number one followed by 100 zeros. Before Google, internet users struggled to find relevant information out of billions of bits of information scattered across the World Wide Web. They never got their PhDs, but they became multi-billionaires, creating a company that in 2019 conducted 3.5 billion searches a day. Full employment and the natural rate of unemployment. The concept of full employment. Full employment is the level of employment resulting when the rate of unemployment is normal, considering both frictional and structural factors. Full employment is closely related to the concept of the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment is the level of unemployment that reflects job shopping in an economy of imperfect information and dynamic change. The natural rate of unemployment is neither a temporary high nor a temporary low. It's a rate that is both achievable and sustainable. The level of unemployment accompanying an economy's maximum sustainable rate of output. Both demographic factors, for example, young workers as a share of the labor force, and public policy, for example, the level of unemployment benefits, influence the natural rate of unemployment. Actual rate of unemployment generally rises above the natural rate during recession and falls below the natural rate during a boom or expansion. Actual and potential GDP. Potential output, the maximum sustainable output level consistent with the economy's resource base, given its institutional arrangements. Actual and potential output will be equal when the economy is at full employment. Actual and potential GDP 1960 through 2020. Here we illustrate both actual GDP and potential GDP. Note the gap between actual and potential GDP during periods of recession. And you can see that. You see that potential GDP is higher during periods of recession. Questions for thought. During a recession, which of the following will be true? A, actual rate of unemployment will be lower than the natural rate. B, actual GDP will be lower than potential GDP. C, actual employment will exceed what is considered as full employment. 2. How will increased usage of the internet by employers and employees influence the job search process? Will it tend to increase or decrease the natural rate of unemployment? 3. True or false? When full employment is present, the rate of unemployment will be 0. Question 4. What is the relationship between full employment and the natural rate of unemployment? Why might the natural rate change? 5. Frictional unemployment is a result of A, not enough jobs for everyone to be employed, B, unemployed workers' skills not matching those needed for available jobs, or C, a decline in the demand for labor such as during a recession. D, imperfect information and temporary periods of unemployment while workers change jobs. The effects of inflation. Inflation is a change in the general level of prices as measured by a price index such as the GDP deflator or the Consumer Price Index, also known as the CPI. Inflation is generally measured at an annual rate. When inflation is high, the year-to-year changes in the inflation rate are nearly always highly variable, making them difficult to predict. Take a look at this chart represents the inflation rate from 1956 to 2020. We can see the baseline is 0, and then we have our inflation 5% here in 1970, and then 75 was over 10%, 1980 was about 13%, and it's been relatively stable between 0 and 5% for the last 30 years. Unanticipated and anticipated inflation. There are two different kinds of inflation. Unanticipated inflation is an increase in the price level that comes as a surprise, at least for most individuals. Anticipated inflation is widely expected change in the price level. Effects of inflation. High and variable rates of inflation are harmful for several reasons. Because unanticipated inflation alters the outcome of long-term projects like the purchase of a machine or operation of a business, it will both increase the risk and retard the level of investment. Inflation distorts the information delivered by prices. People will respond to high and variable rates of inflation by spending less time producing and more time trying to protect their wealth and income from the uncertainty created by inflation. What causes inflation? Nearly all economists believe that rapid expansion in the money supply is the primary cause of inflation. Questions for thought. Suppose that the CPI was 150 at the end of last year and 157.5 at the end of this year. What was the inflation rate during the year? Number 2. If decision makers anticipate an inflation rate of 3% at the start of a year and prices rise by 7% during the year, this is an example of A, anticipated inflation, B, an inflation rate higher than the anticipated, C, an inflation rate lower than the anticipated. Number 3, true or false? When the inflation rate is high and variable, decision makers will generally be able to anticipate year-to-year changes in inflation quite accurately. Question 4. How would an unanticipated jump in inflation impact the wealth of A, Joe, who has a 30-year home mortgage at a fixed interest rate, B, the McCoys, who hold most of their wealth in long-term fixed yield bonds, C, Hannah, a retiree drawing a pension of a fixed dollar amount, D, Jose, a heavily indebted small business owner, E, Mike, the owner of an apartment complex with substantial debt at a fixed interest rate, or F, Tina, a worker whose wages are determined by a 3-year union contract ratified 3 months ago. Number 5, what impact will high and variable rates of inflation have on the economy? How will they influence the risk accompanying long-term contracts and related business decisions? Question number 6. Compared to the United States, labor markets in France, Italy, and Spain are characterized by more generous unemployment benefits. Other things constant, how will this influence the unemployment rate in these countries compared to that in the US? Explain. End of chapter 8. Thank you very much for listening.